an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Welcome to The Fatigue Fixer, the podcast where we get real about why you're so tired and what you can do about it. Every 2 weeks, we'll gather here for honest, heart-to-heart conversations about reclaiming your energy, your patience, and feeling truly at home in your body. I'm Dr. Sarah Vedmonkar, a naturopathic doctor, Menopause Society certified practitioner, Enneagram 3 entrepreneur with enough business ideas to last me 10 lifetimes, and a hockey and baseball mom. Over the past 15 years, I've helped thousands of women just like you cut through the confusion and finally feel like themselves again. And now, I want to hear from you too. Use the link in the show notes below to leave me a voicemail, to share your story, give feedback on an episode, ask a question, or tell me what's been exhausting you. And your voice might even make it onto the show. Together, we'll get to the root of what's really draining your energy and give you the tools, clarity, and encouragement you need to fix your fatigue. I hope you enjoy today's episode. If you've ever noticed a new symptom, immediately opened your phone, Googled it, and convinced yourself you might die by Tuesday, this episode is for you. Or maybe you find yourself scanning your body throughout the day, monitoring your heart rate, your sleep, every little sensation in your digestion or your menstrual cycle, and then going down a rabbit hole of research. I want you to know that you're not alone, but some of that health anxiety might really be taking a toll on your energy. Now, I want to be really clear. What I am not saying right now is that what you're noticing or experiencing is all in your head. Because God, we love to say that to women. The reality is that women's symptoms are often dismissed. So becoming vigilant is a good survival tactic in a system where we don't receive the same treatment as men. And what the research shows is honestly heartbreaking, and it explains so much about why women develop health anxiety in the first place. Women are literally treated differently in the medical system. When women show up to the ER with the same severe stomach pain as men, they wait about a third longer to be seen. And when women have symptoms that could be bladder or kidney cancer, they have to see a doctor twice as many times before they get referred to a specialist. And across the board, women are diagnosed with cancer later than men, meaning their symptoms were dismissed or overlooked for longer. When women feel like we have to watch our bodies closely or advocate fiercely or do our own research, it's not in our head. It's the system that we've been navigating. But sometimes it pushes us over the edge into health anxiety. And health anxiety is more common than most people realize. So officially, it affects about 4 to 5% of people, but experts suspect that the real number is closer to 12% and maybe even double that. And health anxiety is essentially when normal bodily sensations get misinterpreted as signs of something serious. And this hyper-vigilance becomes internalized, and it can show up in a lot of different ways that you might recognize. It can look like constantly monitoring your body, Googling every new little sensation that you feel, worrying you have a disease that you just read about. This is very common for people studying medicine and nursing. Whatever you're learning about, you definitely think that you have. Feeling scared, even when your doctor reassures you that everything looks fine. And for some people, this brings them to more frequent medical appointments and repeated testing. But for other people, it means avoiding doctors altogether because the anxiety feels too overwhelming. And health anxiety doesn't just live in your mind. It can cause real physical symptoms like chest tightness, sweating, trembling, headaches, and digestive issues that just give you more symptoms to worry about. Health anxiety often shows up with other things like depression, generalized anxiety, or trauma. But the common thread is this: the fear about your health, the worry that you experience can interfere with your life, your relationships, your work, and also your sense of ease in your own body. If a woman feels like nobody is listening to her concerns, I'll just have to figure it out myself becomes a coping mechanism. But that health anxiety is energetically very expensive because anxiety itself is metabolically costly. So when you are worried about your health all the time, that can create mental fatigue from having to constantly monitor and pay attention to every little thing happening in your body. Maybe you are spending hours going down these research holes. You're overthinking, you're catastrophizing, making things out to be bigger than they are. It can also be very emotionally tiring because there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of worry. There might be uncertainty, frustration, maybe there's self-blame. You also can feel soul fatigue from feeling like you have to fight to be heard, or maybe you are starting to lose trust in the medical system or in your doctor. And then there's the physical fatigue from having a chronically activated stress response. Maybe you're not sleeping well, maybe you have more muscle tension, maybe you have an upset stomach. When you're this tired and this stressed and this fed up, it totally makes sense that you would go looking for the thing behind the thing, right? The root cause, the missing puzzle piece. And these days, if we look at some of the wellness villains that are really in right now, the kind of like underlying root cause that we are assigning so much blame on, we find things like parasites and mineral imbalances, good old cortisol, our friend cortisol, even things like the full moon or Mercury retrograde. Because this idea that there's one fixable reason you feel so awful is really comforting until it isn't. And look, I'm a naturopathic doctor. I am certainly not against looking for root causes. In fact, when I graduated from naturopathic school, I pledged to uphold the naturopathic doctor's oath, which includes the following: to address the fundamental causes of disease. And if you've ever worked with me, you know I ask a lot of questions about every aspect of your life. I send everyone for thorough blood work because I want to understand what's going on beneath the surface. And then when we add in this feeling that a lot of women have that their doctors aren't listening or aren't looking for the underlying cause, or they feel like they're being brushed off, it fuels a lot of people to turn to other healthcare providers that promise to find and treat the root cause, right? It feels super appealing. But this idea of looking for the root cause has turned, for some people, into this like root cause fantasy, which is the belief that if you just find that one hidden thing, everything is going to snap back into place and you'll be healthy and you'll feel better. Right? So there's a lot of pressure for people who are interested in health and wellness and optimizing their health. There is this pressure to find that thing behind the thing, right? What is the underlying? There must be this underlying thing that no one's looked at or no one's tested that's causing all of these issues. And that often leads to people spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on testing because they're trying to find this magical answer, right? They're trying to find this thing that will explain how they've been feeling. This is why if you open your Instagram or your TikTok right now, there's a very high chance that there is someone in your feed convincing you that the reason you're iron deficient or the reason you're tired is you have a parasite. Right? According to the interweb, everyone's got a parasite and it is the cause of all our problems. Some people would go into like some kind of mineral imbalance, right? If you fix your minerals, if you get the right minerals. And don't get me wrong, minerals are important. You've heard me talk about iron ad nauseum. I'm not anti-mineral, but again, this idea that if we do this special test, we're going to find this special answer that has to do with this special mineral. And if we fix that mineral, ta-da, we're going to be healed. It's not likely. And then cortisol. We're still talking about cortisol as if, again, the adrenals and cortisol, if I just fix that, again, it's going to fix all my problems. These are the really like very current wellness villains that we like to assign a lot of blame to. And what really frustrates me is that some practitioners will weaponize this worry that we have because, again, a lot of women don't feel good. We have legitimate symptoms and we are not getting answers. And so some practitioners will kind of weaponize that worry, that lack of knowing, and they will pathologize completely normal things. So for example, like feeling a bit bloated after you eat. Well, you're a bit bloated because there's food in your stomach. Doesn't mean you have a parasite or something's wrong. Your belly literally just has more stuff in it, so it's going to feel different than when it was empty. So they will turn these perfectly normal things and sensations and experiences, they'll pathologize them, turn into something you need to be concerned about, and then they will create worry that you have this underlying thing that no one's told you about, that no one's looking, and that your doctor doesn't want you to know about. And then it's usually something that they're going to sell you a program, a product, a test to be able to check for. I can fully understand the emotional appeal of doing this because you just want an answer. You just want to understand why you don't feel good. You want to understand why your symptoms are happening. And when you do all this research and you get all this testing, it helps you feel like you're in control. And control feels really nice, or the illusion of control, because there are very few things that we actually control, but we like to feel that we're in control. However, the difficult, frustrating truth is that there are very few symptoms or things that are health experiences that are caused by one thing, by one villain, right? Most health concerns are the result of dozens of intersecting factors, right? So yes, your hormones might be involved, stress might be involved, sleep, trauma. Maybe you're going through a big life transition, like a divorce or perimenopause or having a baby. We've got genetics that no one talks about. We have our metabolism. We have getting older. We have real life responsibilities. We have grief. We have identity shifts. We have all of these things coming together that affect how we feel. But that feels overwhelming, right? It feels too complicated, and it feels like a lot of that is not in our control. And so much of health and wellness often ignores the complexity, right? It's really, if I were to go on and make a reel and be like, you're tired because of responsibilities and grief and identity shifts and life transit, like no one would watch that reel. If I went on and I said, hey, did you know that your fatigue is probably caused by a parasite that no one's tested for you? And if you fix it, you will lose 10 pounds and feel happy ever after. Everyone wants the parasite test, right? Because it's like, oh yeah, that's easy. I can do that. But we are ignoring so much of the bigger picture of what affects us, which are the social determinants of health. And that is things like your income and your social status. It is how much education you have and your literacy level. It is the type of job you have and your working conditions. It is your social support and your environment. It is your early childhood development. What was happening around you when you were a child? It is your access to health services. We know right now that a lot of people do not have access to a family doctor, which is our entry point into our healthcare system. And if you do have a family doctor, it can be very difficult to see them. And then if you need referral to a specialist, that can take years. So we also have a big access problem. And then we also have factors like our gender, our race, our indigenous status. All of these things impact our health and our wellness. But again, if we wanted to look at the big picture factors that I've just listed and do something about that, that requires massive political and societal support to even start to move the needle on some of those things. So instead, what we do is we sell you a full body MRI and we make it your personal responsibility to stay healthy. And listen, I get the appeal. I love knowing about my health. I go for regular blood work. I want to know what's going on. But this idea that if we just scan your whole body, we'll finally know what's going on, especially for someone who has health anxiety, that might sound like the holy grail. Like, oh my God, I'm going to be able to see everything, and then we will know what the issue is, and we'll be able to fix it. Here's the problem with that approach. When you scan the whole body looking for something, you will always find something. And they've looked at this. So 95% of patients who had no symptoms had at least one abnormal finding on a whole body MRI for cancer screening. So you might be like, oh my God, that's great. We should do these on everybody. No, no, no. 95% of people had an abnormal finding, but 91% of those were not relevant. They didn't find anything that was like, ooh, thank God we found that. They were finding things that literally are called incidentalomas, and that comes from the idea of things being incidental. Incidental findings are things that you find when you're looking for something else and you just happen to see this random thing that is completely irrelevant. So incidentalomas are little things that show up on imaging that are almost always harmless. They clinically are irrelevant. They're not having an impact on how you feel, and they never would have caused a problem. These are things like liver cysts or nodules on your thyroid or something like a spot on your kidney or your adrenal gland. So when we look, we find things. But we can find things that are not dangerous, that are not having actually any impact on what you feel. But once you know they're there, it is enough for some people to cause worry because now they are concerned because now they know, well, I have that spot on my kidney. Like, what if that's cancer? What if it's a precancer? What if it turns into something? And especially in this context right now where we have this idea of like healthy being this like pristine body or this like optimal health, right? That's like the holy grail, that everything is going to be like healthy and perfect. The human body is not pristine. It is never perfect. Most of us are going to have some cancers in our body at some point. It doesn't mean they're going to turn into a full-blown cancer, right? You could have cancer cells that your body is going to deal with. So we all have like dents, we have freckles, we have cysts, nodules, we have quirks, we have little things that are imperfect on the inside. And that's normal. But once you see those things, you cannot unsee them. And I know this because I've worked with patients now for 15 years. And when they know they have a cyst on their liver or a nodule on their thyroid, it bothers them, it worries them because now they know it's there. If you are someone who already is living with health anxiety or someone who's trying to optimize and just trying to be as healthy as possible, suddenly knowing that you have like a tiny liver cyst or a tiny thyroid nodule doesn't bring you peace. It brings you a whole new thing that you need to monitor, that you need to worry about, and that you need to obsess over. Right? So this idea that if I just do the test and find the thing, I will feel better, you probably won't, because you're just going to find something irrelevant that's going to create a new thing for you to obsess over. And then you're going to spend your precious energy, right? You're going to spend brain energy researching. You're going to go down the rabbit hole to look up the thyroid nodule. What does it mean? What can I eat? What should I eat? What am I going to do? You're going to spend emotional energy worrying about the thing. You're going to spend spirit energy losing trust in your body and thinking that something is wrong with your body. And then you're also losing physical energy because you're in this, again, chronic stress response from ruminating and worrying about this thing. So please hear me when I lovingly say this. More testing does not always bring more clarity. It doesn't always give you the answer you want. Sometimes it is just bringing more noise. And I want you to also hear this, that I am not anti-testing. I love testing. I often joke that blood work is my love language. I love looking at people's labs. Tests can be life-saving. They can be super insightful and helpful and very quickly help us to know what we're dealing with and what we're not dealing with. But testing needs to have a reason, right? We don't just want to go testing for the sake of testing. We want it to be guided by your symptoms, the context in which these things are happening, like how old are you? What are your risk factors? And by the clinical judgment of your practitioner. We don't want testing to be guided by fear. We don't want to do testing just because we want to try to appease fear, because that actually rarely works. And what I see a lot is that women, especially tired women, the vast majority of the women I see in my office, they feel like they need to be an investigator, right? They feel like something's been missed. And if they can just work hard enough, they will figure it out, or they're doing something wrong and they need to figure out what that is. So they go looking for the smallest little things, hoping that it's going to explain everything, right? Hoping that if they just figure out that one little thing, I'm going to feel better and I'll finally be healthy. Are you tired of being told everything is normal, even though you're exhausted and don't feel like yourself? You deserve better care than that. In my one-on-one practice, I help women just like you do a deep dive to figure out what's really draining your energy. Together, we'll get answers and create a clear, personalized plan to help you start feeling like yourself again. If you live in Ontario or the Outaouais region and you're ready for the next step, visit drsarahv.ca to learn more and book your appointment today. Because being tired all the time isn't normal, and you don't have to keep pushing through it. I want to share a recent patient encounter that I had that actually inspired this episode. And this is a patient who I've been working with for a few months who sought my help because she was dealing with fatigue after a major medical event. And this medical event had really had an impact on her energy and basically her capacity of what she was able to do in a day. And she really wanted to, like so many people, she wanted to feel like her old self. She wanted to be able to go back and do the things that she was doing before. And she just wanted an answer. She wanted to understand, why am I tired like this? What is going on? And so prior to working with me, she had worked with other providers where she had done extensive cortisol and adrenal testing. And she had been convinced that her cortisol was the missing piece, right? Like, if I can get my adrenals and my cortisol sorted out, I will feel better. And she was like exhausted by the process, but she was determined because she felt like, okay, I have this thing that explains my symptoms. And if I can just fix it and make it better, I will feel better, right? She couldn't name the problem. And by naming it, she's like, I can fix it. I can focus on this. In the course of our work together, we rechecked her adrenals. They were actually fine. There was no villain. There was no like root cause smoking gun that we were able to find, even though she had had very extensive testing, not just through me, but through a lot of people she had worked with. And then in our most recent appointment, when she came on and I delivered the news, your adrenals look good, like that's nothing to be worried about. She started to, like, there was a shift happening that you could see where she was starting to accept that her energy was the result of this medical event, that it was different and it wasn't what she was used to. And I'm tearing up just like recalling this because we talked about how she was going to have to grieve her old self and she was going to have to grieve her old life because she was different. Her health was different. Her energy was different. And that was going to be something that she really needed to let herself do, to grieve that her energy wasn't what it once was. And her capacity to do what she had been able to do in the past was different. It was no longer the same. But I could start to see and hear some relief because she had been spending so much of her time and her energy and her money trying to get an answer. And she was starting to accept that there was no magical answer. The answer was that her health was different after this event. And so it was an extremely moving conversation for me, and it reminded me of how important it is to sometimes accept what is going on with our health, even when it feels like things are not as good and things are difficult. And by the end of the appointment, we were kind of like both in tears because we had been on this beautiful journey together, and she had just started to land in this place of acceptance and understanding and not fighting or blaming her body for what it was doing, but actually witnessing the beauty of her accepting that this was her life now. I think it's really important for all of us, whether or not you've had a big event in your medical history or not, healing is never going to come from a perfect lab result, right? We're never going to have all the answers that line up cleanly. Believe me, when I went through medical school, they present things like, here is your patient with diabetes. Here is what they're going to look like. Here is your patient with hypothyroidism. And then you go into the real world, and obviously humans are not textbooks. There's no patient that only has diabetes and one that only has hypothyroid and everything else is pristine. Like, our bodies are so complex. And so this idea that we're going to find this silver bullet magic root cause thing, and if we fix it, everything will be glorious, is not the reality for the vast majority of us. That patient, her healing wasn't going to come from a perfect cortisol test or from fixing her adrenals, quote unquote. It was going to come through accepting what her body had been through and learning to live in partnership with it instead of constantly hunting for flaws, hunting for like, what's wrong? What I hope that you take away from today's conversation is that acceptance is not giving up. It is trying to stop the war that a lot of us have with our own bodies, that every time something doesn't feel good, we have to like activate and energize all these resources to go find it and fix it and get rid of it. Acceptance actually frees up a lot of energy. And it made me think of the saying, what you resist persists. That's actually not the full saying. The full saying is, what you resist not only persists, but it will grow in size. And that is from Carl Jung. And this idea that the more we resist and the more we hyperfixate on certain things, we actually just create more of that thing. And I think this is difficult because what I'm not saying is that I do not want you to ignore your gut feelings, right? A lot of times women know something is wrong. There is something wrong. I do not want you to ignore that. I don't want you to ignore your gut feelings. I don't want you to ignore your intuition. But I also want to remind you that gut feelings don't sound like anxiety. Gut feelings are nudges, they are messages, they are kind, they are gentle. Anxiety is the like freaked out, oh my God, this is bad, horrible, we got to figure this out. That's anxiety. Anxiety is not your gut feeling. Those are two different things. And learning to discern those different voices, those different parts of you can be one of the most powerful things you can do for your health. Acceptance also softens the nervous system. If your brain is constantly scanning the environment, both outside and inside of your body, looking for things that are wrong, that creates a lot of stress. Acceptance also builds body trust, that our bodies are not perfect, but they are doing their best given the conditions that we are in. And acceptance is often that root cause that we're overlooking, right? We want it to be the thing that we can fix. And sometimes the only thing that needs to actually be fixed is the acceptance piece, accepting that things are not perfect and accepting that things are changing. How do we find that balance, right? How do we find that balance between advocating for our needs and wanting to be and stay healthy, which I support and I get, but also at the same time accepting that perfect health isn't a thing. It's not an actual goal that I think we should be striving for. And so part of this is balancing that root cause thinking. Should we look for patterns? Should we go for our annual screenings and our blood tests? 100%. But that doesn't mean that we need to go looking for villains and we don't need to go looking for problems that don't exist. We don't need to go create problems by over-testing and going down the rabbit hole. We also need to learn when to stop testing. So one of the questions I'm always asking myself as a practitioner is, will testing change our treatment plan? So I'll give you two examples. Testing iron will change my treatment plan because if you are not iron deficient, which would be very rare, but if by some miracle you're not iron deficient, I'm not going to give you iron. An iron test is helpful because it helps me decide whether or not you have iron deficiency and that needs to be treated. When we test things like cortisol or adrenal testing, is that going to change the fact that most of us need better stress management? No. I actually don't often test cortisol or adrenals unless a patient 100% needs or wants to see it, because all of my patients are receiving advice around stress management. I don't really care if your cortisol is a bit too high or a bit too low. We are all highly stressed and we all need to do something about it. So if you need a piece of paper with your cortisol to help you do that, sure, let's do it. But most of us know that we need to work on stress management without testing that. And this is a fine line to skate. And it's something that I'm always checking myself on as a naturopathic doctor, because part of being an experienced doctor is knowing when it's time to keep searching and when you want to kind of dig some more and look under the hood, and also when it's time to accept that there's nothing inherently wrong and that the best thing might be to accept whatever is going on. So in the case of the patient I just spoke about, that was the journey that we had to go on, was like, okay, yes, we need to cover our bases, make sure that all the things that could be causing this fatigue are checked. But once all of those come back normal, my job is not to keep testing and looking further and further at things that are incredibly rare and unlikely. I think my job is to help that patient get to a place of acceptance and understanding that things feel different. And that is difficult, but continuing to go down the rabbit hole is not actually going to find the answer you're looking for. It's not going to fix the thing. And so I think a question that's really important for you to ask yourself next time you're asking your doctor, a naturopathic doctor, whoever, for a test is, what am I hoping this test will give me? Because usually what we're looking for is certainty that either there is something there or not something there. Maybe we're looking for permission to be worried. Sometimes we're looking for permission to take action. Sometimes we feel like the test will give us a better sense of control. And one of the things that I find fascinating is a lot of times when we do find something, if I find an iron deficiency, patients are so relieved because for them, it helps them. It confirms that it wasn't all in their head. Because again, going back to where we started, so many women have their symptoms dismissed. Women are much more likely to have their symptoms labeled as somatic, meaning, well, it's in your head, calm down, honey bun, and just work on your stress and everything will go away, right? We get labeled as stress, anxiety. We get labeled with all kinds of mental health conditions for symptoms that could be very physical and have nothing to do with just being anxious. I get the testing can be helpful to help affirm your experience that what I'm feeling is not made up. I am not making it up. It's not in my head. I have on paper now an explanation. So I get that can be very helpful. I also want you to zoom out instead of zooming in, right? We have this tendency in medicine to get hyper focused and focus on this one hormone, this one enzyme, this one number. And again, our health is so much more complicated, right? Symptoms are usually multifactorial. Again, there's very few things where it's this one thing is from this other thing, and if we fix it, we're good. What you're experiencing, it's much less likely to be one thing, and it's probably the result of both the internal and external environment in which you find yourself. So let's zoom out, look at the big picture. I also want you to notice when the search becomes a coping mechanism, right? If you are Googling as a way to make yourself feel calm and safe, I think that's really important information for you to know, because it tells us that what you're doing is fueled by anxiety. And I think it's also really important to understand that strategy never works, right? Because number one, Google is limitless. You could spend the rest of your life Googling and going down more and more rabbit holes. And there's always going to be someone telling you that something is terribly wrong with you. It very rarely provides comfort. It actually fuels more anxiety. I also want you to try to practice getting in the habit of slowing down enough to hear your body instead of interrogating it and being hyper vigilant of noticing everything. And if you want to hear more about my journey with slowing down to hear my body, you can go all the way back to episode 2, which is the one where you hear your body speak. And I share my experience about dealing with chronic bloating for years and literally doing everything that you can think of, from like candida cleanses to stool testing to food sensitivities to enzymes and the whole shebang. I did all the things because I was trying to figure out the root cause. Why am I bloated? What is it? And one day I literally was walking with a friend and it like came to me again, because I was like in a quiet space, that my bloating had nothing to do with food or candida or parasites or any of that shit. It was actually unacknowledged grief that was showing up physically. And as soon as I realized that and I approached it differently and I worked through the grief, my bloating has been very different since then. So if you are feeling worn out, if you recognize yourself as someone who is like constantly looking for this root cause, you're constantly on that treasure hunt looking for that one thing. If you basically spend your off work hours working for Dr. Google and going down the Facebook rabbit hole in all the patient groups, I want you to know that it's okay to log off. I want you and encourage you to mute the Facebook groups that swear that it's like always a parasite, a mineral, or cortisol, or your doctor doesn't want you to know this. Your body is wildly intelligent. It is wildly resilient, and it is way more complicated than any like TikTok diagnosis that you're going to find. Your body is allowed to have off days because it's a human body. It's not a machine that's going to perform perfectly every day. That's just not realistic. And when you worry about every tiny thing that it does, that is not wellness. That is exhaustion. And often it's also health anxiety. And health anxiety is not making you healthier. It's just making you tired and worried. Thank you for listening, and I will see you back here in a few weeks. I know your time is precious, so it means so much to me that you're here. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a woman in your life who could use a little extra energy and encouragement today. It's a small way to show her you care, because we're all in this together. Wondering what the next step is? Find out what's really draining your energy by taking my fatigue fingerprint quiz at fatiguefixer.ca/quiz. You'll discover which of the 5 most common types of fatigue you're dealing with, like frazzled fatigue, where your body's exhausted but your mind won't turn off, or drained fatigue, where no amount of sleep ever feels like enough. Your results will include recommended labs to ask your doctor about, plus my top suggestions for habits and practices that can help you start feeling more rested, calm, and in control. Because here's the thing, being tired all the time isn't normal, and you deserve to feel like yourself again. And hey, if you've got a story to share, a question, or just something on your mind, leave me a voicemail. Your voice might even make it into a future episode. Thanks again for listening, and remember, it's not all in your head. I believe you, and we'll figure this out together. I'll see you right back here in 2 weeks.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.